today. Our next guests are a real treat for all of us. I would like to welcome Sam Covell and Scott Van Valkenburg. And Sam and Scott will present about their journey on procurement, specifically at Genpact. Let me introduce them briefly. Scott Van Valkenburg is responsible for Genpact's global alliances and channels efforts. He has over 20 years of experience leading and driving impact with and through partners. Prior to joining Genpact, Scott had a similar role at SAS and was a principal at PricewaterhouseCoopers on the consulting side. Sam Covell is a recognized expert in procurement in the professional services industry. As Genpact's Chief Procurement Officer, she leverages her skills, experiences, and understanding of global business complexities to develop innovative sourcing strategies that deliver measurable outcomes. Sam and Scott, we're thrilled to have you here and share your expertise and journey with us. And thank you very much for taking the time to do that with our global audience today.
Thanks, Jose. We're super excited to be here, and hopefully we can share a little bit about our journey with you on leveraging and using Celonis and looking at how we transform and have operated, our procurement efforts within Genpact. So as we go through today, to give you a bit more background on who we are and what we do, you got our bios of both Sam and I, and Sam and I have kind of been partners in crime in this journey. But what I'd like to do is to share what the next 35 plus minutes is going to be about, is to give you a little bit more insight onto what Genpact does and what we do in particular around the world and how we help and serve our clients. Talk to you about our Celonis journey within our internal use and also as a partner of them and how we serve other clients and where we are headed. So without further ado, let's dive in and we'll talk a little bit about Genpact. So you may not have heard of Genpact, but if you had, you know us through our growth and build out and then spin out eventually from General Electric. So in 1997, we were a part of GE where we were applying Six Sigma and looking at how we could improve back office functions through that approach, and then also with well-talented and educated folks from all over the world. As GE grew in that business, which started out in GE Capital we then moved to other GE businesses, and they said, why don't we then start looking at how we can help clients in and around that GE served. And then GE said, hey, this isn't our core competency. So we spun out of General Electric through a rapid growth. We were listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 2007. We have had a great growth rate of helping clients all over the world improve and run through digital and people and process many back office functions, which I'll highlight in a moment. We're close to 100,000 folks all over the world. We do delivery centers out of 30 countries. We talk over 30 different languages. We continuously drive digital innovation with and through partnerships with companies such as Celonis. We focus in finance and accounting, we focus in procurement, we focus in risk and customer onboarding, etc. So super happy to be here. I think you'll enjoy getting a little bit more of our insights on what we do and how we do it. So let's talk a little bit about Celonis. So we actually started a partnership with Celonis approximately 2+ years ago. As it was emerging in the US, we were very fascinated in Genpact and how we served our clients in the approach of how you could digitize processes, look for inefficiencies, areas for improvement, etc. So as we began that journey with looking at to leverage the digital capabilities of Celonis, we also realized through the partnership and then through our internal use, there could be a tremendous amount of value to help Genpact as a whole and as we serve our clients. So as you are probably aware, Celonis is a leading process mining technology throughout the world. They have over 100,000 users. They have 350 plus customers. They've been in business for over 10+ years. They serve multiple industries in multiple countries, and they've really built a tremendous platform that knows how to go get the data, talk with the data, and then show the data in a meaningful way to business users on what's actually happening within their processes, whether it's in procure to pay, accounts payable, or in supply chain, customer onboarding, et cetera. And obviously, we'll talk about procurement today. With that being said, our partnership was launched a little more than a year ago, and it's a great marriage. So we've been able to serve clients all over the world. Celonis absolutely matches Genpact's process-centric view approach. I like to say we eat process for breakfast at Genpact, and bringing in the insights for running, large corporations, back office functions for many years, and that depth and knowledge, along with the digital footprints that Celonis helps you see and uncover areas for improvement, has been a great marriage. So with that, let me just give you a quick highlight on how Celonis actually works. So, I mentioned this concept of a digital footprint. So what Celonis has creatively been able to attack is, if there is a time span and an activity that's connected through any of your ERP systems of records, Celonis has built the ability to extract that information and then recreate that into a visual story of what's actually happening. So if you think about the procure to pay process or accounts payable, et cetera, it can literally take that information from various systems and then format it in a way for a user to actually see that story and life cycle of what's happened, where there's inconsistencies in the approach, what's the root cause of that approach, and areas that should be considered to look at deeper for potential fixing. And then really at the end of the day, what then that is, gives you a tool and an ongoing dashboard to really continuously identify bottlenecks, exceptions, reasons for process variations. And really the way you can look at it is then go in and improve it. The analogy I like to give is, if you follow Formula One, they're the pit crew chief that can tell the driver how they're driving and what to look out for, where there's accidents, when to come in for fuel, et cetera. And that power of Celonis is really dramatic in helping companies all over the world improve how they're running their operations and areas for really driving change and transformation. So I'm going to hand this over to Sam and tell you guys a little bit about our internal journey and use, what we do in procurement, and we'll go forward from there. So Sam, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Scott. So when we think about Genpact procurement, we have spent about $890 million with third parties, and we would call that our influenceable spend, so things that should be going through sourcing and things that should have a PO, etc., associated with them. I have about a team of 70. It does fluctuate a bit, and they're a global team. We operate in 60+ countries, and they're distributed across our main areas that we have our main operations. And then we've been growing as an organization 15% year on year, and that does pose quite a lot of problems in terms, well, not problems, but challenges in terms of how you make sure your systems, your processes, your policies, not just your own team, but also the broader organization is up to date and understands how to be compliant and how to keep within process when they need to buy something. So we've been grappling with that. And three areas that we really wanted to focus on were the opportunity to minimize maverick buying, to reduce our unwanted purchasing activities. So we felt there were a lot of activities that weren't adding any value that we were getting sucked into. And then also being able to not just drive business value, but also be able to demonstrate the business value that we were driving, which was something else that we were struggling with. And when we started our engagement with Celonis, we found that the insight that we were getting from the system was enabling us to actually start our journey and our investigation as to how we could drive all of those three things forward. So just building on what Scott was saying, the exciting thing for us is that we're using all the data points that we've had for quite a while, but what we haven't been able to do effectively is to turn that into actionable insight. And that's the really exciting thing about Celonis, because it's built with all the logic inside it and the knowledge of the sourcing process. You're able to leverage that to really to make sense of this vast amount of data that you have and all the different data points from all the different systems that you use. So we found that super exciting and really valuable. And I think we're going to talk about that as we go through the next slides.
Yeah. So Sam, before I go in and I talk a little bit about the journey, I remember when I first called in, I said, hey, we've got this great partnership with Celonis. I think it could provide significant impact internally. What was your thoughts as you went through that and you talked with our CFO and you started looking down this? Had you ever, looked at something like this or had thought about, what this could mean for you?
So I think if we're honest about it, that my leadership team and myself, we were slightly skeptical of the impact it would have, because it's just another way, in its really simplest form, it's another way of looking at all the data that we already have. And you kind of, we all pride ourselves that we have been doing a good job actually doing that ourselves, but it's only when you see the power of creating the digital twin in terms of the process that we're running, and then understanding all the different ways in which things don't follow the 2B process. So everything that's there and all the different, what can be hundreds of different routes things take through our sourcing process, really helps you to focus on what's important and where all the kind of the noise is in the system.
Yeah, and I have to suspect that the mindset to look for opportunities to improve really has to be reinforced, because quite often, as we've served and helped clients too, sometimes people are taking this the wrong way to point out where they're not doing well versus, this is an opportunity to really tackle things that could get better, right? And I know you really have driven that mindset amongst the team, because they were a little skeptical when we started, right?
Yeah, no, I think we all were, but it's really interesting how quickly people have been won over. And I do think one of the key things that have helped that is we're no longer scrabbling around trying to find data and trying to understand what the data is telling us. What we're focused on now is how we improve what we have and how we have the right conversation. So from a kind of a process or system perspective or a policy perspective, but then we're working with the business in a much more targeted way to understand why they are working outside of that process. And so we're having a much higher level of conversation, or real change management around how can we help them with the challenges that they've got, rather than just focusing on why didn't you raise a PO at the right time, and the more kind of transactional conversations we were having before.
Yeah, and I know one of the big benefits we've seen internally is the ability to tackle the subject really on facts versus just a transaction, right? And where people have areas of responsibility. That's a huge, it's not like he said, she said. You can go, here's what's actually happening. Okay, well, let's peel what that means back, and is there a better way to achieve the savings targets and the purchasing process we have set up? Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we talk a little bit about this journey? You can see the big stages that we're having, we're still going through, but if you could peel back a little bit more for the audience in detail, what each phase meant, maybe some of the things we were learning as we were going through in your mind, how long, and some of the highlights of these, that would be great.
Yeah, so in terms of onboarding and implementation, obviously it's only going to be the initial scraping of the data and running it through the if you like, the process maps and things that you end up with, is only as good as the quality of the data that you put in. And some organizations I know are very fortunate to have very clean data. We don't have very clean data. Part of that is just part of growing as quickly as we have as an organization. So things change constantly, and it's very hard for everyone to keep up with that. So the work that we did initially was actually going in and looking at where we could see we had big gaps in our data, or where things weren't going to be categorized properly, or where examples might be where we had systems that sat outside our main ERP system, and how did we start to bring that data into the overall process so that we didn't have a big gap where nobody could see what was happening in that part of the process. So we spent a lot of time doing that upfront, which has proven to be invaluable as we can move on to the latter stages now in terms of how we actually derive insight and can speak to the business meaningfully, because they actually recognize the data now, because it's much more likely to correspond with what their view of the world is as well.
Yeah, and I think, one of the interesting things is, if you look at the onboarding implementation, there was that first phase of getting people's mindset around what the possibility could be, right? And then really linking with our internal IT, the process to connect data, it's not actually tremendously long and stressful. It's just making sure people are aligned and honestly getting access to the systems more so than anything else, right? And for the audience, don't think light of that. Onboarding your IT teams are really important. I think the other part that was quite useful, Sam, was the partnership with Celonis as we went through this, right? I think there was a continuous learning of education and approaches of how to do this, and that feedback to you and the team.
Yeah.
Really, I can't say enough about it, right? Even though we're partners, but out of sincerity and authenticity here, they were a great partner with us through this. So, you get to this, you get it plugged in, you're starting to see some stuff. How did people take it? Were they like, wow, this is great? Or were they thinking, oh my God, what does this mean? Or
so I think our biggest challenge, and actually the big enabler for us, I should say, is the fact that we decided that we weren't going to be afraid of what the data told us, right? So and that we were going to use it as an opportunity to understand our data better. And the reason I say that is because the first time the data's run, it can show some things that are, quite scary in terms of your process gaps, or just things that are happening outside of that standard process. And it's only when you then start to peel back the layers, you get all the nuances that are specific to your business. And that's when it starts to get really interesting and allows you to have those really valuable conversations with the business. But we were quite open about that first run of the data. And the thing it did for us is it opened up the executive sponsorship that we needed to drive some of the change management, because we weren't sure how big an opportunity we had, and the numbers showed that it was quite a big opportunity. Everyone aligned behind us to actually help us work out what the numbers really told us. So it worked very well for us, and I think we've got the amount of insight that we now have into our processes compared to where we were pre-Celonis is amazing. It's light and day in terms of what we can now do with that data.
Yeah, no, and I think that mindset of that opening the eyes of the executive leadership, and the ability for us to really leverage technology and people and process to actually affect our approach, our alignment with the internal stakeholders, and then the cost savings targets and approaches your teams drive. It really just, from an outsider looking in, it really just changed the conversation for us, right? I mean, it was that impactful that everybody was like, can we do this better? Can we learn more? Can we tackle and collaborate versus confront each other, right? Which I thought was quite positive. Let's shift a little bit about this and talk about our implementation journey, right? So you hear from these broad levels of, hey, I can connect it, I can then start seeing areas for improvement, I can figure out to dive deep. But do you want to walk through and kind of give this story of this implementation journey a bit more life, of some specifics on what you were tackling, what your teams were tackling, and then talk about how we're continuing to do this as we go forward?
Yes. So we've adopted this kind of implementation journey, and we call it our path to value. So this is how we are going to derive value from the system, but deliver value to Genpact as well. So we decided to focus on initially, because obviously when suddenly you get all of this data, it's a bit of a feat in itself to understand where you want to start from. And obviously the system will give you some ideas about where you need to prioritize your opportunities, but you need to obviously kind of narrow it down enough to make it manageable. And so we've looked at 3 processes in varying levels of detail, because we're at different levels of progress against each of those. So the main one that we looked at, and the one we started with, was the maverick buying. So identifying our maverick spend, and then working out what we do about that. The other one was cycle time analysis. So how do we reduce our overall cycle time? And then the third one was around right first time. So understanding where we just touch things multiple times, we cancel things, we change things, and just understanding why we're doing that, so that we can reduce all the unwanted non-value add activities. So we've identified those, we prioritize them. Our number 1 priority has been the maverick spend. We've spent quite a lot of time now looking through the root cause analysis and understanding within that how we're going to prioritize the activities that we have. So I'll give you some examples of what we've done. So first of all, we prioritize the understanding of activities that were bypassing sourcing and then bypassing the PO process altogether. So and as part of that, we've then been able to look at what happens to those invoices that come into Genpact that are orphaned and don't have a PO attached to them. So we've been able to then double down on, well, how do we sort all of that out, but also how do we make sure that people move into the process next time around. We also have some exceptions to our PO process. So part of that prioritization, the next thing in our journey is to actually go back and revisit all of that and see whether we can move some of those exceptions into our main PO process. And that will give a lot of visibility to the whole organization for areas of spend that have previously just bypassed that process. So there's things like that which we were able to prioritize. We've created the improvement plan. We've got targets. We're working towards that. And we're in the process of creating the targets for the other 2 processes that we spoke about, just making sure that we're aiming for the right thing. And then we run governance with this, cross-functional governance, which we're running it bi-weekly actually at the moment, because we've got so many things that we want to talk about. So we run it, so myself and Genpact's controller lead the day-to-day governance, if you like, of this process. And then we report on a monthly basis to our exec team in terms of progress and where we're seeing challenges, which they then help us with at an organizational level.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, I often hear this with the clients we serve too, because Celonis can uncover a lot of areas, right, and can also let you understand what the impact. I think focusing on those key areas in the beginning that are going to be your KPI markers, right, are so important as you get through the initial journey, right? So,
yeah,
that thing, it's really, I think, taking that kind of mindset is really important, especially for the audience as you think about this. You're going to be leveraging this and using this for a long time, but especially with alignment with the executive teams, et cetera, showing that people call it the low-hanging fruit, but those things are really going to matter for an impact and change, and then managing how long that change and the progress of the change matters. So Sam, we've been at it for a bit. You want to just give us overall how we've done to date?
Yeah, so we've reduced our maverick buying. It's currently running at about just over 1% in terms of true maverick buying. So we're hugely excited to have been able to achieve that. And that's obviously come with an associated saving of $8 million. I think the next step for us, and we were talking about this as a team this morning actually, is it's not just about focusing on things that had previously bypassed sourcing, but it's now focusing on how do we identify where we only get involved at the very last minute, and therefore it might actually go through the process, but we don't have an opportunity to influence the savings and therefore drive that value for the business. So we're working through what are the data points that we can use that will actually allow us to identify that and then take action on that. So that's, you're always building on it, always thinking about how can we move to the next step and what can we do with that. So at the moment, as I've said, we're looking at the how do we improve our process efficiency and reduce our cycle time even further. We've got lots of ideas coming out of the work we're doing there, which is hugely exciting. I think just the reduction of the these are the three that we've really focused on, but a byproduct of that has almost been the reduction of the administrative burden for the team, because we don't have to spend so much time on data collection. What we're spending time on is looking at the insights and taking action, and then being able to demonstrate and measure those better business outcomes are where we're kind of heading at the moment. We've just done a voice of the customer survey, and the number of people that are now aware of our processes and what they need to do has dramatically increased, which shows also that people are actually working with us on this rather than pushing away from the controls that we're putting in place, which has been great.
Yeah, no, it's really been exciting all the way from our CEO, CFO down. And I think as we learn the journey internally for the clients that we serve, leveraging Celonis, we're able to share some of those insights as well. So if you look at kind of the takeaways for the audience to think about, right? We're still on our journey. We'll talk a little bit about where we're going. Just give us some highlights of key things folks should be thinking about on lessons learned, and at least from Genpact's experience, what our keys to success have been.
So you've already touched on the initial kind of getting IT on board so that you can make that the uploading of all your data into the system as seamless as possible. That's, we didn't do enough, I don't think, right at the front end, just making sure everybody understood and what was comfortable. But, lesson learned, definitely would do that next time.
Yeah, get them in and get them in early. I mean, I think them being part of the understanding the journey, it's difficult to go, oh, hey, we decided to do something, go do something on the IT, and they're confused why, does it, have InfoSec? And yeah, so I think that's a spot on call out. Yep.
Then the whole design and adopt thing. So the real value of Celonis is that you're leveraging all the processes that they've, the way they set the process up within the system, right? So their understanding of the process, their understanding of the data points that you're going to need, the kind of reports that that's going to enable you to generate means that you can get to your data much quicker. But obviously it's more generic because it needs to be. So you do have to spend some time understanding, well, what does that mean for your business? Do you have business units? Do you have verticals? Do you, how is it you want that data to actually be represented? And so you do need to get your hands dirty quite early on. And that's difficult because at that point, you don't really know what you want. So you do need to keep revisiting it as you get more familiar with the data and more familiar with the what it can do for you. Taking ownership is really important. And again, it's about up and down the organization. Every single one of my team are kind of in there getting involved. It isn't you can't step back and let other people get involved in the detail. You have to be taking ownership and being part of that, which moves on to the next point, which is we're moving it more into BAU now. So initially it was very much a project, but now it's just how we do business and how we operate as a team. And we're constantly thinking about how can we do it how can we use that data to improve what we do? And then the last point, not to be underestimated, and everyone will have different data issues, but you really need to spend the time on making sure that your data, and to be fair, right, this has been one of the great benefits we've had from this process, is it's actually allowed us to focus on that. So something that we'd maybe given less priority to became something that was much more obvious and something that we needed to do something about, which was great. And then obviously we've had our success, which is around the executive alignment. Our COO and CFO have been, very proactive in their support of this project, which has been great. We've also worked across, it's a full cross-functional team, so quite seamlessly actually the sourcing team and the accounts payable team have been working this together. But we've also been working, more broadly than that with all the business teams, so that's been great. The what's in it for me piece is different for different groups of your stakeholders, and it's really important to identify that, and that's where these more strategic conversations have really helped, because we've actually been able to identify, for some people it's about cycle time, for other people it's about just the noise, not understanding what's happening to their own processes, etc. And for other people it's about savings, so it's great. And then, we've got more to look forward to, and the organisation generally is excited about the next things that we're going to be looking at, one of which is really using the Action Engine functionality and seeing how we can help that to drive that day-to-day activity that we do.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue as we get into where we're going. If you look at it, this predictive capability with Celonis using the AI and machine learning to identify a potential process breakage by impact amount beforehand to the user that would touch or users in the process is super exciting. So maybe Sam, why don't we just quickly highlight before we get into questions, what the future is looking like from us, and then even beyond procurement, right, in the other areas, and how with your colleagues you're going to align some of the predictive capabilities and some of the accelerators, and then we'll get into Q&A.
Okay, so we're moving out beyond just the sourcing activities, which I think is the important thing for us. So our controllership team are now picking up the baton and looking at the processes that they can use Celonis for in terms of driving further opportunities for them. And that will, as it has done for us, spawn a whole new load of activities out into the business, which I think is good. In terms of the operational apps and Action Engine, I'm going to be honest here and say that there's a lot of new functionality that Celonis have driven through those that we're not up to speed with yet, because we've been focused on driving the kind of the core functionality. So we're really keen to understand that now, and I believe that the link from Action Engine back into Oracle is now complete, which means that we don't have to keep swapping in between systems. So that is going to drive a lot of excitement around how we do that. So that's definitely something we're focusing on in the next couple of months. And then the accelerators, maybe Scott, you want to talk a bit about those?
Yeah, so I mean, the accelerators is a really, promising, exciting area where it's, pre-built, focused topic areas, procurement, et cetera, that are going to, drive change from dashboards, KPIs, drill downs that you can get going and using and tweaking to run, your functional area, and then across the board where there's connected process areas in a whole new fashion. And in the old days, you might need to have to build what that would look like or shape it, et cetera. So we just, for how we're serving clients today, but also our internal use, this is incredibly promising. And as Genpact is able to put its own lessons learned in IP in and around how we serve clients. It's just going to benefit everybody. So super, super excited about that. So with that said, Sam, we got a lot going on. So it's been a good journey. I'm just at the end of the day, I just to reiterate, I said, I mean, I think our relationship and support from Celonis, the kind of impact we're seeing, you'd say we're pretty pleased with how this is moving. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, we are super excited.
Excellent.
Super excited.
So why don't we open up? I know we have a few minutes left, guys. I guess we'll open up for the audience through the chat session to ask us any questions. Feel free to ask us. You know, we'll answer as incredibly authentically on what we've learned. You know, the good, bad, and ugly stuff that has been incredibly positive. But feel free, if you're going through this journey or considering a journey like this, to post a question on the chat, and I'll be happy, and Sam will be happy to do our best to answer them.
Fantastic, Sam. Fantastic, Scott. We have had questions coming through as you're speaking. So I'm going to ask you, Scott, to stop sharing the presentation so that they can see us on our video feeds. Terrific. So for either one of you, one of the main questions that has come up throughout is if I'm starting with process mining, you gave an excellent example there in procurement. What do you think what type of criteria I should weigh as I think about areas, the most potentially valuable areas in my business where process mining can really extract great value for me? How would you guide the audience in terms of identifying what those best areas for value creation could be?
Sure. I mean, I'll take a stab, and then Sam, if you wouldn't mind, just echo. I think there's two important, if you're just getting started, there's two important things to consider. The one is you need to start where someone actually owns the majority of the process, right? So sometimes people may go, hey, I want to tackle order management, which is a great word, but order management touches a whole bunch of different owners. So you could go through, we saw this as a client, you go through a whole bunch of proving it out, et cetera, and areas for improvement that says, hey, tackle this, that, but it touches too many owners. And so you don't have a sponsor that says, I'm willing to fund people time and effort around this. I think the other big place that you can just see even with Celonis's clients, you know, the finance function is always a great place to start. And whether it's in the procurement, if it's in accounts payable or accounts receivable, especially in times of COVID, where you know you want to see a dramatic impact to your bottom line by saving money or by on your purchasing or getting your collections and receivables coming in quicker. That, you know, that's kind of the get it going and then move forward. So that would be from my perspective. Sam, do you agree? Is there anything else you would add to that? I'll take Sam as saying yes.
Sorry, I lost all of that. If you were asking me a question, I've just come back.
No worries. I was just saying, you know, you need to have a specific sponsor of a certain area. It can't be trying to get divided across 2 or 3 sponsors. A process could touch many areas, but if you have a pretty formalized group, whether it's procurement, accounts payable, accounts receivable, that tends to get going out of the gate much better than, let me just tackle as my first project order management, something like order management where you have 5 or 6 different stakeholders and not one owner for the decision. So that was my comment.
Yeah, I think the other thing is you upload all of your data, right? So if you're open to doing that, once you've uploaded all your data, the system will help generate those priorities, areas that you need to focus on. So for us, the first thing we needed to focus on was the Maverick spend piece, but you know, for other organizations, it would be different. And then you can work out, once you know what you need to focus on, whether you're going to do that either regionally or by business unit or whatever, you know, whatever it makes more sense to you. And you'll have the data to help you with, you know, that decision on whether you pilot or whether you get, you know, launch on a company basis or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll reiterate is the mindset matters in this. If you go in, I'm here to point out where everybody's failing, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in. If you're here to go, we're going to continuously improve assist your organization and show with that mindset, you have a much better opportunity for success.
Very good. You know, in our previous presentation, we had the leader from Molex sharing the procure to pay journey that they had with process mining. And an interesting point that he made is that, you know, we didn't have one procurement to procure to pay process. Across the organization globally, they had over 900 different ones. And so one of the questions and one of the themes that have emerged from the questions as you're presenting is this issue of process characterization, and Sam talked about data quality. So how do you bring that all together before you actually deploy an engine for process mining? What type of preparation work you have to do before you deploy the engine to find these optimizations?
Well, we did
Sam,
the other way around.
The data piece, then you want to talk the process. So like when we leveraged Celonis, the huge benefit was they had connectors that knew how to go get the data, put it in a way to see it. So that's half the battle. You know, a lot of people go, oh, I'll just find the data, I'll visualize it differently, but that thing really mattered. But Sam, why don't you talk a little bit about, you know, the first view and everybody sees process and they go, oh, does it mean something, does it not, and variances, etc.
So yeah, so we I guess maybe naively, but we just literally launched it, right? So we spent the time getting the data uploaded, and then we took that first view of the data. And I will share with you that that first view of the data showed that we have Maverick spend running at about 60%, which I didn't believe, but the data was telling us that, right? So, and of course, you know, the CFO, my boss, and other people had seen that data by that point. So then we galvanized around, well, why is the data actually showing us that? And then we were able to understand where the deficiencies were in our data. So in a way, it helped us prioritize what we needed to do to sort the data out. So for us, we went that way around, which has been really helpful. And I think it's speeded things up as well, because in a matter of months, we've been able to do that. Whereas I suspect if we'd just started looking at our vendor masters and our, you know, everything else, we would have been swamped with the size of the task in hand.
Absolutely.
Very good. That is so. I appreciate that answer, because it sounds like there is a bit of a discovery process, right? You don't know what you don't know. The engine itself and the data acquisition is exploratory early on, and you dig deeper. So that's really interesting. And we have time for one more quick question and answer here, and I want to make sure I get this question from William Fuller. And William asks specifically around your action engine, and how did you generate excitement relative to that action engine in the organization?
You want to get that? I'll just highlight and then Sam, get out. I mean, as we serve clients, the vision of the ability to predict a process being broken before it gets broken to the right person at the right time is, you know, nirvana, right? So I think at that high level, you know, the dream got people excited. I think the reality of making that work, you know, that's still a work in progress. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about what that was, you know, when you first heard about it and what it means to you as we're going through it?
Yeah, so we what's interesting actually is when you talk to my team, they're trying to beat the system, right? So what I mean by that is they're trying to put things right before it shows up as a potential breakage in the process through the action engine. So they've done a lot of work around clearing out old PRs, open POs, things like that would show up as a problem within Action Engine and bring your attention to it. So they've taken more of a kind of a gamifying approach to it, if you like, and how can we make sure that things don't show up on there. But it's actually the fact that it's giving you on a daily basis, you get an update that says, you know, these things are in your process a bit, you know, outside the parameters that you've set it, or these things need action, these things need to happen. And now that you can link that directly back into Oracle, I think it's going to be such a massively useful tool. And as I say, we've got, you know, plans is to really exploit this over the next couple of months to make sure that we've, not just my team, but the broader organization is also taking the benefit from the action engines.
Very good. Listen, really appreciate your sharing your expertise here. Such an open, honest conversation about the opportunities, the challenges. This is really fantastic. I must say that, Scott, next time we do the session, you're going to have to start with the drums on the back.
That's how we get people to come to hear the next part of the journey.
That's what I think we need to do. So, Scott and Sam, what a pleasure to have you here sharing the journey, your thought leadership with us, and your very substantial, application knowledge here. Thank you very much for sharing this with our global audience today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this segment, and we're going to see you at the top of the hour. At the top of the hour, we have Anissa Al, who is a leader at Celonis, talking about system migrations and 3 ways process excellence can make an impact on large system migrations. And Anissa is going to bring those perspectives to us, a build up on some of the subjects that we have already talked about related to process mining. So we'll close the webinar now. We'll reopen at the top of the hour with another great presentation related to systems migration and process excellence. So see you back at the top of the hour. Thank you.